really a big landmark for the CGIAR. Okay, so it's a big landmark for the CGIAR. What's important is it's supposed to make sure that all final information products are made open access, not just publications, also data sets, photographs, images, websites, everything has to be open access. So it's quite a big challenge. However, it's a fantastic landmark. Let me then show you the URL. So if you need to find more, this address, cgir.org/open, is where you will find all the different materials. Now, let me then take you back a bit. Why is it so important? And this is the diagnosis we had in around 2008, 2009. You have this famous iceberg. I think there are not many in India. There's also not many here in Ethiopia. But anyway, you have this iceberg where you see the accessible knowledge floating above the surface. And underneath this huge amount of knowledge that we typically all have in our organizations. And the question was really, are those outputs really accessible? The answer was, and probably still is for many of us, not really. Firstly, we don't capture them all even. Very often the workflows are not there. Second, they're very often locked up. Many people keep their knowledge locked up behind passwords or firewalls. This might be deliberate, or it's maybe just accidental. They're on an intranet, for example. They're not even digital. There's huge quantities still of very useful knowledge, which is still not even digital. So it's not really open, can't really be open access. Where they are online, very often the addresses are not permanent. Very often our colleagues, somebody somewhere will reorganize their website and all the links break. So that's a bit of a disaster. So you can't find them there for posterity. Can't find them. Licenses, all rights reserved. We don't encourage people to share things. So they're not accessible. They're very deep in that iceberg. So the important thing to note, I think, is that most of what we do is to produce public goods. And I think if you're working in the national research in India, you're also supposed to produce public goods, whether they are national public goods, local public goods, or international public goods. For the CGIAR, it's supposed to be international. And what I'm showing here is a blog post from a meeting that was held in 2008, where the Science Council then of the CGIAR talked about international public goods. And what they basically say are that these goods have cross-border international benefits. And if they don't get accessible, if they don't travel, the CGIAR will not achieve its results. So fundamentally, accessing and sharing that knowledge is fundamental to what we have to be trying to do. So what was important about that meeting was that it came a meeting of the top level science people of the CGIAR. Wasn't the information people, wasn't the knowledge management people, but they kind of said that if our data or information or knowledge, it should be able to travel across boundaries. It has to be international or across states, whatever it might be. It shouldn't be staying where it is. It should be described and stored. Easy to find, should be shared and reusable. And in those days, we were talking around something called the AAA. Everything, the knowledge we have should be available. You should know it exists. So even if it's not fully accessible, we know it exists. We have the metadata. It should be accessible, that if possible, you can download and reuse it. And it should be applicable. It should be something which you can take and translate and adapt and relevant and put to use. So quite a big agenda in those days. Okay, so what are we trying to do then is we have this famous iceberg, and in a sense, I think we're trying to turn it upside down, to tip the iceberg, so that most of our knowledge, our outputs, should be above the water, and only a small amount, perhaps, stays inside our organizations. That, for me, is where this open movement is taking us. So let me talk a little bit now about going open at ILRI. And from us, the starting point for me has always been it's not just open access, although open access is very, very important. We're also looking for whole research processes that are much more open. Open in the sense that partners, our NGOs, can participate and engage. The knowledge from farmers can be part of that process. The knowledge of high-level scientists is also part of it. So we don't want something which is closed up, a few people in a room. We want the whole process opening up. A little bit like what, I see a lot of things happening at ICRISAT these days. We want to have those open research products. And there we're talking very much about open access, but also the formats have to be open. You know, if you publish something in a format that nobody can open, it's not open. The whole activities themselves, very often research is done, you know, you're doing your events and your workshops and different activities. Often they're also invitation only, secret, nobody knows about them. So let's open that all up. The platforms we use, the tools we use should also be open. And I think we need to be moving to, that's what we're trying to do at ILRI and elsewhere I've been working, is this open by default. So when you do something, the first setting, the default setting is to be open. If you create a web page, it will be open. If you create a wiki, it will be open. And the person has to make an argument why it should be closed. So what does it look like at ILRI? We use a lot of different things. For example, we use wikis. So every time, so for more research programs, we try to make sure that every workshop we do is listed. You can find information about all the events, the workshops. So for this the event you're in right now today, I was looking for the web page which would tell me about this workshop. I couldn't find it. So Dilip and you guys, we need to make sure that you're really sharing. I know you'd probably tell a story afterwards. So when you open one of those things, you find what happened in the meeting, who was there, what they discussed, the notes of the meeting, the presentations of the meeting. It's all there. It's all accessible. Nothing is secret about it. Unless, for example, you have some confidential data that you can't share yet. But in principle, if you have a meeting and you invite people to that meeting, you're using public money, the conversations, the discussions should also be public. The same with projects. And we use a lot of tools like wikis because they're very open. They're very easy to make open, not just for our scientists, but for our partners. So we tell people when you have a project, don't wait to the end of the project to tell people what you're doing. As you go along, tell us about the project. When you have a workshop or when you have a field trip, when you have a tool you're working with, talk about it, share it, document it. All the presentations at ILRI, as far as we can, every PowerPoint and every poster will be made open, and we use the slide share for that. We also index everything in our repository. So open the presentations. It's not just books, not just journals. Scientists are producing a lot of different things. Let's make sure they're all open. The photographs we take, the books. Google Books is something where we've, you know, even before we had our repository, we were putting all our publications on Google Books. One of the things we tried to do was to make sure that the books are full view, because of course many publishers use Google, but they limit it. For us, it's like, let's put the full views there. Anybody can download these books and do something with them. And the outputs, of course, and probably that was the main focus of this whole presentation or this whole speech, was to talk a little bit about the repository. So we also made a commitment in the last 4 or 5 years that we're going to make every single product that we produce open, full text, downloadable through our repository, if we can. And there are some challenges there. Open source, of course, let's not forget. So we've been using DSpace for our repository. So here you will see a place called GitHub. And basically, all the work we do with DSpace, whenever we modify it or adjust it or make any changes to it, we deposit the code in a public place. So other people who are using DSpace can also benefit. So it's not just the content that we manage, the tools themselves that we use. We also have a requirement to make them open. Open data, of course, and this is a huge, huge challenge. At ILRI, we're a bit behind some other people, but I think this year at least we began to see a lot of data. And what you see in the text here, it's the metadata of all data sets is available. So this availability is there. The data itself is not all there yet, but is coming. But it takes a lot more, there's a lot more challenging here sometimes to take a data set and put it online, as you maybe will already know. It's really important that, you know, applicability, we want the knowledge to be used. So we want to use licenses. So although ILRI owns information, it licenses anybody to reuse it for non-commercial purposes if they give attribution. And we really want to make sure we have that attribution. But basically, take it, use it, run it. Don't ask for permission, just use it. And as an organization, we've been trying to say, well, it's not just about you know, the products being open and some of those processes. We would like to be listening, interacting. So when we developed our strategy in 2012, we went explicitly outside and asked questions and got feedback and had discussions. So basically, it's a matter of publishing in an open way, but also trying to be listen openly, try to get ideas, open for feedback. And I love this. This is a much more general concept, the idea that it's not just about the products, everything we do, you are working in the open. And this is, there's a kind of a group of people nowadays thinking that, we should be actually talking about our work, explaining our work, interacting with people out in the open. Don't wait till the end of something. And when you do that, then you're much better chance that people will take up your knowledge. Okay, what are the steps that we took in a sense? And I haven't gone back very far in history. I've gone back to where I started to get a bit involved with ILRI. So in the late 2008, ILRI management commissioned a review of the knowledge management and information services. And one of the challenges was, okay, what's happening new, and what's happening new, where should we be going? And one of the kind of the big strands was we need to really be paying attention, proper repositories could move to open access. Late 2009, then the organization decided in principle to set up a proper repository. Previously, we had some library systems that weren't really proper repositories, and we decided to use DSpace. We also said then Google Books, they weren't all open. We made the switch 100% open because there were already hundreds and hundreds of books on Google, but they weren't open. Early 2010, top management bought into this, and we adopted a Creative Commons license, and that's now being used across everything we produce, whether it's a video or a publication or a data set. We had agreed that, yes, the repository would be the central place to capture all of the documents, reports, outputs, and index everything. We would make much more intense use of social media as a way to broaden the uptake, to increase the visibility. And some of those themselves are also quite open. And we will go for open access as a kind of explicit management kind of approach. Then in the last few years, the CGIAR has got busy in this area. And you've seen in 2013 and 14 a lot more direction from the CGIAR. Our policy I talked about, we now have some guidelines, and we now have to develop an open access and research data plan. So let me talk a bit more about DSpace, because I'm told that that's really the repository part of all of this. So I said we started in late 2009, driven by the demands that we have all of our outputs and products available and accessible. This was designed to be a replacement for an existing InMagic library catalog, which contained full text but didn't have full open access or full repository features. We also had hundreds and hundreds of PDF files all over the place. People were putting PDF files everywhere, and we said, this can't go on. We're going to stop all these PDF files. And so we're going to put all PDF files, and only legal ones, into the repository. People were creating all over the organization homemade lists of outputs. And then we said, let's have a central repository, which would be the master list. And people were doing all kinds of manual linking, updating of HTML pages, and the repository will auto-generate a lot of those different lists. So we started with an ILRI repository, and then we very soon found that a lot of the content could be shared with other people, not just with ILRI. So we've worked with a lot of partners now in a project called CG Space, where you will see a lot of other organizations from the CGIAR using the same platform, basically. Okay, a little bit about the ILRI repository. This is called Mahedar. It's so you may see Mahedar sometimes, and this is basically an Amharic word from Ethiopia, meaning folder or storage place, something like that. It's the way we publish. It's not just a repository. Basically, if anybody at ILRI has a document or a report or something which needs to go online, the DSpace is where we publish. And so basically, we don't sell to people the idea that a repository is a repository. We tell people this is where you publish your knowledge. It's a publishing platform, not a repository, which is a bit boring in some sense. However, of course, it does provide archives, and it gives visibility. We index everything we possibly can, and we publish the full text if we have permission. And you all know the issues around open access, commercial journals, and all these things. So we don't always have the full text that we can share. We like very much that it's a mainstream open source solution with a big community around us. We don't have to manage all of this ourselves. And it's basically one of the key planks in our whole being open approach. What does this mean in practice? Having gone this direction, I have a slide here showing we kind of keep track of all sorts of different web services view. And there's some numbers here that show you that since we kind of went open and since we went much more explicitly in the direction of social media, the repository, the numbers of views, the numbers of downloads have massively, massively increased. Now, of course, numbers don't say everything, but this is the kind of slide our management loves, because they can say, oh yes, we're spending money on knowledge management, and we can see the numbers booming. I don't know how they compare to your organization or ICRISAT, but the general trend is, so you see, going from 2009, around 3 million to 18 million, 19 million in 2013. So it's a massive increase in views. Now, this does not tell you anything about uptake, use, impact, but just gives you some very simple metrics. What is the contribution of the different services to that? And I've done some very simple adding up, and you can see in 2010, the very bottom is the intranet. So this is the most closed part of our knowledge systems, in a sense. And over time, that has decreased. We've been very explicit. We want to have information in our intranet, but if it's anything that can possibly be made public, we make it public. So the top blue is social media, and you can see that's growing in importance, and that's all those blogs. Especially, we do a lot of blogging and using wikis and using collaboration platforms. So there's a great more and more use of that, and basically all that knowledge is open. The second one down, Google Books, is also a very big chunk. It's decreasing slightly, mainly as a proportion, but because I think, but the numbers are increasing, of course. But just to show you, so it's increasing, but again, that's 100% open. The middle blue is the website, and it was very important. Then it kind of lost a bit of momentum, but then it's grown again as a big. So in the last year or so, we've again made much more effort, and everything there, that's also 100% open. And then the repository, you can see a big chunk of our views and the usage is coming from that repository. And again, that is not all open. I mean, a lot of it is, but it's not all. So the kind of the line showing open doesn't go to the very bottom, because there's still a chunk, I guess around 25% of the repository, which is still not fully open. And we're working on that, but that's very difficult to get 100%. Okay, so I'm coming to the end. Let me talk a little bit about some kind of what reflections, some thoughts. It's not by books and journals alone. And one of the things I find a little frustrating with open access is that we always end up talking about green and gold and journal articles, and that's a big piece of what we publish, but it's not the only part of what we publish. The biggest part, in some ways, for us anyway, as ILRI, is all the self-published, the research reports, the working papers, the discussion papers, the PowerPoints, the posters. We produce and publish many, many other things, not just books and journals. So let's make sure that we're looking at everything. In fact, the books and journals, especially the commercially published ones, are the most difficult part to make open. The other stuff, I can guarantee to my management that 100% of what ILRI publishes itself will be open access through our own publishing, our own research reports. To get a journal article open access, that's much more challenging, especially if it's high impact. The culture of open has been getting this much more culture, so getting away from just the books and the products. How do we have the organization be much more open and much more wanting to share and wanting to be shared with? So how do we build that listening and sharing and engaging? Because if you have that open climate, then people are much more interested in open access. We have found that social media, adding social media to all of this, has been a great way to open up the flows and make content much more visible. So we get a large number of referrals from to the repository from our blogs and our wikis. So basically, we advertise the new publications and the reports using our blogs and our website. Open platforms with open APIs, that allows you to share much more. So we like to use some of those, our own things like DSpace is going to have a new REST API, a much more open API coming up in the next version. I'm hoping that will allow us to even more easily share, technically behind the scenes, share and exchange kind of across platforms the different content we have. Open licenses, really, really crucial. Also for our own publications. And people very often, they're going open access with their journal articles, but their own books are all rights reserved. And there's a kind of a contradiction there. And again, open standards, metadata, really, really important. We want our content to be in other people's systems. That's being part of being open, is that your content is somewhere else. So not just on Google, of course, but also on the CGIAR website and elsewhere. So we need to have those open standards and agree those amongst ourselves. Last slide. Institutional issues. It's often technically, we have our own challenges, but institutional are often much more critical. So we found attending to the workflows is very, very important. So basically, we've set it up so that, if you want to publish a publication, the publishing team of ILRI are actually in the same group as the curation and the knowledge management team. So the people running the CG space, the repository, are the same as the publishing people. So we have no gap between the publishing process and the archiving process. It's basically the same. Yeah. So basically that workflow right. We also have distributed individuals across ILRI who have communication responsibilities. We've made sure that they know the different channels, and then when they have something that's ready to share, it also goes into the repository. We really forbid PowerPoint, PDF files on any website, on any other place. It has to go through the repository. Money, dollars, or rupees, whatever you need to have that money somewhere still. There are still many scientists who are publishing in high impact, or high academic impact, or perceived high impact journals. Of course, nobody reads them, but they're high impact because but you have to pay for that open access. So we're now getting much more success in persuading scientists, and of course the funders are much more open to include dollars for open access as part of their projects. We found, of course, that it needs quite a lot of expertise. If you really do this properly and well, and you really exploit the benefits of open access, you need to have people who know about content and metadata, and management of content and knowledge, and capacities in those areas. Also technical capacities. DSpace, the basic DSpace is very, very simple to set up. As soon as you start having to do more complicated things, you start building in some different reporting systems, you start doing some shared work, it becomes more complicated, and keeping it without, on the same, so you can upgrade it to the different versions. So you really have to have some in-house or some capacity from somewhere. Lots of questions around metrics and impact factors. The journal editors are very clever in offering us an impact factor that allows scientists and managers to think they are measuring things. Most of the open knowledge we produce doesn't really fit in that system. So we're still trying to find, how do you demonstrate that your poster has somehow an impact, because it has no impact factor. So how do we measure all the other types of knowledge we produce and somehow compete with this kind of false impact factor notion? I put this one here about privacy and ethics. In the work we're doing with the scientists about data, especially around data and photos and images, we tend to think, okay, we collect things and we put it online and make it accessible. But in fact, it is just the same with Facebook and all these things. There are issues around privacy and ethics, and we have to be very careful that we don't, exploit. If you take photographs of farmers, we don't just put them online and use those people to get money for us, and those farmers have no idea they're being exploited to some extent. The data we collect, we have to make sure it's collected in an ethical manner, and we will make it open, but the people in the communities also have to have access to that somehow. Final point around incentives, rewards, recognition, and this links to that metrics and impact factors. We're trying to make sure that when our scientists are evaluated and assessed, that their commitment to open access or open sharing of knowledge also comes up. But again, it's difficult to measure that. Typically, they are measured on how many articles they produced, and they can say this one has a factor of this, and that has a factor of that. When you've actually, produced 10 research reports or 5 working papers and run 6 workshops and, trained 500 farmers, those things don't get so easy to measure. So we have to find some way to really make sure that if you go to open, you get rewarded for being open, in addition to being rewarded for being high impact. Now, I think I've spoken for more than I thought, and that was the end of this presentation. Thank you. I hope there might be some questions from your side. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So we will have this session open for question and answer. So participant, please feel free to have a questions or any further information, clarification on anything which Dr. Peter has presented.
Maybe I spoke too quickly.
Yeah. So can we have questions or anything, any further information you need?
So,
Like to first, congratulate you, the entire group to be, from a closed repository to an open repository, and which is.
I'm not hearing the person.
you're able to hear now?
I'm hearing better now. Yes.
Congratulate.
Please have your question. I'll repeat again from here. Okay, the question is, first of all, being open and getting into open access is like a huge step, especially given that most of the research that smaller organizations like us cannot access. That's number one. And then number two is very valid point is the number one is what are the metrics and measuring metrics, and also most importantly is the privacy and ethics. That is something which. Yeah, so Dr. Ramamurthy has a question which has a, I'm just summarizing his question. So he compliment you from going from closed repository to open repository. Then he would like to have a more information about the evaluation part and impact part and all that. And another question is how you are handling the issues about ethics and intellectual property and all that. So is it clear question?
Yes. Okay. There's some tough questions there. Okay, that's quite challenging. Let's say on the intellectual property, let's do that a bit easy. I mean, the things which ILRI publishes itself are owned by ILRI. So if anything I write belongs to ILRI. This PowerPoint that I'm presented now belongs to ILRI. So for staff members, that's relatively easy. So everything we produce can become into the repository, no problem. One of our challenges is if you are working with partners and collaborators, so let's say we're doing a joint venture between ourselves and ICAR or something like that, and who actually owns those things, and we need to so we have some guidelines which specify how you co-own, co-share different types of intellectual property. So the other challenge, in a sense, when authors write articles for commercial publishers, they often sign away our rights. They give our ownership to the journal. And what we've now said is that they're not allowed anymore to sign those things away. Our legal office will double check and we will negotiate. So basically, for our own staff, that's a bit easier. It's much more challenging where you have consultants or third parties. And very often our contracts, the legal contracts we use, are not actually as up to date and they don't cover this issue as much. So we're trying to do that. On the impact business, we collect a lot of metrics, mainly, about different types of content and how it's being used and how it's being downloaded and all those things. But we don't really have citation indexes yet for a lot of that content. So I mean, the journals use this impact factor based on bibliometrics and citations. We can look at downloads and things like that, but that's not the same as a citation. So we don't really have an easy. I mean, as I see it, there isn't really any easy way of measuring the fact that this poster, we can show how many times it's been viewed and downloaded, you can get comments on it, you can measure things about it, but does it have an impact factor? At this moment, not very easy. And so we're talking to our HR to say, okay, if an open poster should be worth more than a closed poster, an open article should be worth more than a closed article. But how do we measure that? How do you actually do it? We don't have an answer. We're just trying to think. So if anybody in the room has a good answer, I would be happy to hear it.
Thank you. So any other question? Is answer satisfy you? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so it appears they are happy with whatever you have presented. So thank you very much from ICRI side. We are very grateful. At very short notice, no?
It was my pleasure.
Yeah, you offered your time, valuable time and energy. And on behalf of ICRI side, participate and knowledge sharing group, Dilip Kumar and myself, we thank you for your involvement and having a very interesting session. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you very much, and good luck. I'm looking forward to seeing all that Indian knowledge fully accessible on
Yeah,
livestock.
correct. That's true. Thank you.
Okay, goodbye.
Goodbye.